Hello, sir.
Hi, Tom. My name's Kevin.
Hey, Kevin. Good to
Good
see
to
you.
see you. So I'm going to give when we start, I'll give a very brief introduction. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, I can.
And let me just turn my volume up a little bit because I can't hear you too well.
Is that any better?
Yes. um, the only thing that I'm confused about is how to, I have, did you get a sign on from SABR to be a host?
No, but I don't know that I need that. Oh, host
So I,
disabled.
so I want to, after my brief introduction, I want to pass it over to you because people aren't here to see me; they're here to see you. Um, I'm gonna look around for a minute and see how to do that.
Okay.
Or you
In the
think I
part,
don't? You think
in
I don't need to do that?
well, no, I think you do because I can't share my screen. In the participant panel, are you able to right-click my name and set me as host?
I don't have right click, but I have more. Let me see what more says.
Yeah, more.
Okay, so I'll make you a co-host.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah, now I can do it. I'll bring up my starter slide. Do you have any slides at all, or should I just bring up my first starter slide with a title?
No, whatever you want to do. I was
Okay.
gonna put our logo up there, but I didn't get around to doing it today. This is
Yeah,
the first time we've done this. So.
okay. It'll be smoother if I just do this. All right, do you see it now?
Yep.
All right, cool. Then we should be good.
Where are you, Tom?
I'm in Rochester, New York, upstate,
Oh,
Western
okay.
New York. Yeah.
I live in Peekskill. I don't know if you know where that is. Northern Westchester,
Mm-hmm.
by the Hudson River. About
Yep.
about an hour by train from the city.
Yeah, so you're what some people in the city might call, quote, upstate, but you are definitely not what I would call upstate.
Yeah, that's always been kind of the upstate's just maybe the lower
Yeah.
Catskills.
Yeah, exactly. We recently celebrated our 2-year wedding anniversary at the Mohonk in the Catskills.
Oh, okay.
That place is fabulous.
It is. It's very cool.
Yeah, it goes back to the 1800s, the Smiley family. Yeah, that is quite a facility.
Yeah, we've spent a lot of time around New Paltz area, and
Yeah. I'd always heard about it. It's a good 4.5 hours drive from Rochester. So growing up here, which is, I'm from Rochester and still live here, I'd always heard about the Mohonk, but I'd never been to it before. So that was a real treat, especially after no vacation so far this year and being quarantined like so many others.
right. Yeah, I've never actually been there. I've been on the property, but I haven't really like
Stayed there.
experienced it.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, they have most things open by now. Some of the spa services are a little bit limited, but pretty much everything was available. You could go canoeing and swim in the lake, swim in the indoor pool. They had the dining room open, social distancing and masks, of course, but by now things are rocking there. They're only at 50% capacity though, so they're not using the whole hotel.
Mm-hmm. So I'm glad I signed on this afternoon or late morning because in my mind I was thinking this was 7:30, and then I couldn't I had been sent a special admin sign-on, but I couldn't find where to do that because I was using my Zoom account instead of Chapter's Zoom account.
I see. Yeah.
So luckily, I got in touch with Jacob, and he answered me pretty quickly. And got that straight now.
Jacob is the man.
Otherwise, I would have been here at 7:25 and not been able to do anything. So.
Yeah, that would have held us all back.
Hello.
Hello, is that Bob?
Yep. Hey, Tom. How are you?
Welcome. Hey, yeah, welcome. Good to
Looking
be
forward
with
to
you
seeing
all.
you next week. Next Monday, hopefully.
Yeah, no, I've got several of these lined up. Done a couple so far, and I think I've got 3 in August, so it's fun. We at least have some games to watch now. Before it wasn't looking so good, but
That's right. That's right. Even though our Astros are having some problems. It goes.
Okay, so it's 7. I guess we'll wait 1 more minute.
yeah, I usually wait 1 or 2 minutes. I'm on Zoom most of the day, and with my work colleagues, I almost never start right on time.
We're going up till 8 o'clock.
Yeah, I think that's what it was scheduled for. That works for me.
North Jersey chapter has one at 9 o'clock tonight.
Right.
Tom, I don't think I have your email to get in touch with you if I need to. Anybody?
Yeah, I'll put that in the chat right now, but it's also, I'll have it on a slide at the end.
Okay, great.
I'll put it in there now.
Got it.
Yep. Mr. M. Frank, if it's all right with you, I'm going to mute your line. The fan behind you, I think, is making a little bit of background noise. You're happy to have you come off mute when you have questions or comments, but
Yes, sir.
thank you. Well, Kevin, unless you're waiting for a particular person, I'm happy to
No,
to
I'm
get
good.
going anytime.
Just welcome to everybody. My name is Kevin, Kevin Carter. I'm the web guy at Casey Stengel chapter of SABR. Um, Thanks for SABR for hosting this platform. And we welcome Mr. Tom Stone, author of Now Taking the Field, baseball's all-time dream teams for all 30 franchises. And tonight he's going to be focusing on, of course, the Mets and the Yankees primarily. And I really don't have much more to say, and I'm going to pass the ball over to Tom. And
Okay. Thanks, Kevin. Thanks for
keep your chat box open, and we're ready to roll.
Yeah, thanks for lining this up for me, Kevin. I've done a couple of these. I did one for the Baltimore chapter, and I did one for the Cleveland and Columbus chapters combined, and they were a lot of fun. Definitely keep the chat open. You can add snide remarks if you don't like things that you see. You can answer. I'll have some trivia questions as we go. You can answer them there in the chat. Feel free to come off mute, though, if you want to speak on audio as well. We'll make this pretty interactive, I hope. As Kevin said, my name's Tom Stone. I'm from the Rochester, New York area, so a good 6 hours out of the big city. I grew up here. I went to the University of Rochester, got a bachelor's degree there in 1995. I work in the human resources industry, learning and development in particular. I'm a researcher. I work for the Institute for Corporate Productivity. This baseball book wasn't my first book. I co-wrote a business book on virtual training, something that's very hot right now. Our book came out in 2015, but how to use Zoom and WebEx and Adobe and all these platforms for online training. Obviously, our book is all of a sudden selling well again after 5 years. My co-author, Cassie Labori, is somebody that I met through the industry, and we actually started dating, and after we wrote the book together, we ended up getting married. So I always joke that if you can co-write a book with someone and have them edit all of your words and vice versa, then if you can make it through that process, then you're on pretty solid ground in terms of a relationship. So we have one son. He just graduated high school. In fact, that was just yesterday that we finally had the socially distanced graduation ceremony for him. So that was nice to finally do after a couple months of him being done with classes. So why this book? I lived in Rochester, New York. I played baseball, Little League through high school. I was a pitcher, sidearm thrower. But when you live anywhere in the Northeast, of course, you can't play baseball year round. I didn't play Stratomatic. I played other simulation games like this one from Kodako. If you remember this, the disc-based game from the 60s and 70s. I had several versions of that. I played some other ones as well. And then the computers came out. I was fortunate. I had an Atari computer in the early 80s. And this game, Micro League in particular, was nice. It came preloaded. It's a stats-based game, not a joystick action-based game. And so it was all based on the statistics of the players, and you'd play these simulated games, much like the modern sim games like Out of the Park and others today. If you got the general manager disc, though, you could do more than just have the 75 Reds play the 61 Yankees and, the teams that they preloaded. You could create your own teams. And so I spent a lot of time as a kid, 10-year-old, 12-year-old, 15-year-old, creating all-time dream teams for each franchise, loading them into the simulation Micro League, and then seeing the results. Of course, back then, had to use big paper encyclopedias like the one on the left. That's actually a picture of mine, a little tattered. This is all, of course, well before the internet and Baseball Reference and everything. So fast forward to 1999, and I decided I wanted to actually write a book on all-time dream teams. Certainly not the first person to do this, but it's something that I had long dreamed of doing since I was a kid. Took me a good 20 years to write the book. I worked on it off and on, changed jobs, got divorced, just lots of things happen in life. And a big project like this, you end up working on it a little bit and then putting it down and going back. And of course, the way baseball is, any sport, more players come along. And so when I started the Yankees, for example, Derek Jeter had only been playing for a few years, so wouldn't have been considered for an all-time dream team yet. But by the time I'm done writing in 2019, obviously he's the all-time Yankee shortstop. So a lot of players like that, Albert Pujols, Mike Trout. I mean, there were several dozen that came on the scene and needed to be included as I went along. It's a big, thick book, 600 pages. So that image there on the right is pretty accurate. You can see here, it's sort of a doorstop of a book. I had two really good editors. One was a copy editor, basically, but another was Gabriel Schechter. That's a name you may know. He's been a SABR member, I think, off and on over the years. He was one of the researchers at the Baseball Hall of Fame in Cooperstown for a number of years. He lived right there in the village. He has since moved out to Oregon and is semi-retired. He's an interesting character. He worked as a poker dealer out in Las Vegas earlier in his life. He actually dealt some of the World Series of poker in the 80s. So he's a character, but he's also a very good editor and brought a lot to the book project in terms of substantive baseball comments as well. I sort of lucked into a publisher with Acta Sports. They put out the Bill James Handbook each year. I won't go into the story of that, but just through some business connections, I got introduced to them. And so they're the publisher of the book. Of course, it's available at Barnes & Noble and Amazon, as you'd expect. And then I do have a publicist, Pressbox Publicity, who's helped me do, he hasn't been involved with lining up these SABR events, but helped me get about 100 radio interviews since the book came out early last year, and got me on MLB Now. So that's me in the middle there, sitting between Girardi and O'Dowd. That was a lot of fun last February of 2019, when my book was fresh, getting to be on MLB Now. That's one of those bucket list dream come true type things for a first-time author. Wasn't Brian Kenny, it was Scott Braun, but Scott's a great guy and had a lot of fun doing that for the first time. So we'll get to the Yankees and Mets here pretty quickly. So just at a high level, what's in the book? 30-man dream team rosters. Don't ask me why I chose 30-man instead of 25 or 26 like a normal team has. I think it came down to, if I limited myself to 25 or 26-man rosters, there were just too many snubs, and I just couldn't stomach some of the really great players that would be snubbed. Of course, even at 30-man rosters, certain guys get left off. So there's snubs no matter where you draw the line. I started with wins above replacement WAR. As SABR members, you're all familiar with that. Sometimes when I do radio interviews, I have to explain a little bit what that is for their listeners. But I didn't end at WAR. I started with that as a baseline. That's something that's unique to my book as opposed to other authors that have done this. But I also looked at other considerations as well, which I'll get into in a minute. I provide starting lineups and depth charts. We'll see that for the Yankees and the Mets. And another unique thing about my book is I compared my choices with all the past authors that I could find, all the past fan surveys. That's one reason that the book is so thick at 600 pages, because I report on who they chose and compare them to my choices. So a little bit on the ground rules for doing this, because there's of course different ways to go about picking all-time dream teams. First off, I looked at the entire history of the franchise. So that means the Dodgers includes the time as Brooklyn and LA together. The Nationals, of course, includes their longer history as the Expos, Twins, the Senators, Orioles, the Browns, etc. So it truly is the word franchise that's relevant here. As I said, I chose 30 players for the rosters. So you've got a starter and a backup at each position. I chose an extra 2 sort of position player guys, just could be at any position, a third catcher or whatever it might be. That varies from team to team. And then I chose 12 pitchers. But unlike a regular roster, I was much heavier on the starting pitchers. And that's just because the history of the game, there's a lot more starting pitchers to choose from. Relief pitching became a specialty only in the past, say, 4 or 5 decades. And I varied. Some teams I only chose 2 relievers, which looks a little odd on a depth chart, to be sure. I did also choose 4 managers for each team. I didn't spend a lot of time on that. It's not a specialty of mine. You know, I looked at their all-time wins-loss percentage, how they did in the postseason, but I didn't get into trying to analyze, you know, how did they do with minimal talent versus a bunch of all-stars, or what was their reputation in the clubhouse or anything like that. Like I say, it's not my favorite area, not my specialty. So certainly people can disagree with me pretty thoroughly if they want on who I selected there. But key thing here, and not all authors and fan surveys have done this, is that only the player's accomplishments for that team are considered. So if a player, you know, moved around some, like say Ricky Henderson, you know, he makes the all-time athletics. You can make a case for him to make the all-time Yankees, although I think he only played 5 seasons or so. But some of the other teams he played only 1 or 2 seasons for, you can't use his whole career and say, okay, he's on the all-time whatever. You know, only his time for that team counts. What that also means, though, is that some players can make more than one all-time dream team. Classic examples like Frank Robinson making the Reds and the Orioles, Eddie Collins, Jimmy Fox, Lefty Grove, guys like that, obviously making more than one. Which brings me to my first sort of trivia question, which I'll throw out there and you all can try guessing in the chat. I had in my book, you know, your mileage might vary if you were the writer of the book, but I had 4 players that made 3 all-time dream teams. So try and think of players that were really good, had a long enough years to make it onto 3 all-time dream teams, and you can try and guess those in the chat. We had some good fun with that on the previous Zoom calls I've done like this. So there were 4 players. I'll give you another hint. 3 were pitchers and only 1 was a hitter. So we'll come back around to that once there's some guesses in the chat a little later. As I said, I started with wins above replacement as sort of the starting point. I looked at total WAR for that team. I looked at the players' top 3 WAR seasons to get a sense of their peak value. And I also looked at WAR divided by games played. That's not something I've ever seen anyone else do before, but I wanted to get a sense for sort of their average value on a per game basis. So I didn't just look at total WAR because that would favor players that were maybe a little more mediocre but played a long time. I wanted to look at peak performance and stuff as well. I looked at traditional stats because, you know, WAR isn't perfect and different people have different criticisms of WAR. Some prefer Bill James win shares. There's 2 different types of WAR, Fangraphs and Baseball Reference. I used Baseball Reference, but could have used either. But I looked at everything. I looked at old school stats, things that maybe we poo-poo now, like wins and even saves. I looked at everything, all the traditional stats, and considered those. I looked at honors and awards. Granted, these sometimes, of course, popularity contests. We may disagree with certain people winning MVP or Gold Glove in any given year. But I also figured if someone was an 8-time All-Star and someone else was only a 2-time All-Star, you know, there's probably a valid difference there. It means something. So I looked at that. And then I looked at postseason performance because we only calculate WAR and stuff based on the regular season. And there are some great players that do really well or really badly in the postseason and needed to consider those as well. So whether you wanted to, you know, weigh postseason performance, and we'll see that with the Yankees in a second, you know, much more heavily than I did, or maybe you care about traditional stats and don't care about WAR, you know, there's endless ways to disagree with my selections. And if you do the math, 30 picks for 30 teams, that's 900 selections in the entire book of players that make these dream teams. So plenty to disagree with, and that's a lot of the fun of this kind of topic. So I see some guesses coming through on the players that might have been making 3 different all-time dream teams. And R. Scott McKay, good job on Roger Clemens. He did make 3. Not many people guessed that because, of course, he didn't pitch long for the Astros or the Blue Jays. Red Sox is a given. He doesn't make my Yankees, but he makes the Astros and Blue Jays because it's a bit easier to make those all-time dream teams since they're expansion era teams, a lot less history there. Although when I update the book, which I'm now going to do after the 2021 season, Clemens might be coming off that roster. Verlander definitely needs to be added to the Astros. Garrett Cole, unfortunately, only played a little over 1 season there, so I'll probably end up keeping Clemens on there instead of Cole, but you could certainly make a case for Cole. Nolan Ryan, definitely one of the others, and so he made 3, of course, the Rangers, Angels, and Astros. That one is a pretty straightforward one. Bonds makes the Pirates and the Giants, but only those 2. He's one of many players that makes 2. Eckersley, no. Eckersley only made the A's. I didn't include him on the Cardinals and didn't make the Indians either. Although I think I considered him for both of those rosters. And that's another feature of the book. I don't just describe and have a few sentences, a blurb about the 30 players per team that I chose. I describe and talk about all the ones that I considered, as we'll see with some of the tables here in a minute. And no, Rickey Henderson did not make the all-time Mets, as I said. With someone with Henderson's career, he played for so many teams in the end, he could make probably close to half the all-time dream teams if you looked at counted his whole career for every one of them. As I said, I looked at other authors and fan surveys. This was a lot of fun part of this project. Another reason that it took me 20 years to do. You know, Rob Neyer's book was great in 2003. He chose pretty robust rosters, starters, and backups. If you ever read that book, there was a fan survey in 1969 that was published in the Sporting News. Going back to the 50s, we'd had enough baseball history to by then already think about all-time dream teams, and Sport Magazine covered all the teams at that time and had little write-ups. I think they did one team per month for over a couple of years. And there have been others. I don't list them all here. But again, that's one of the reasons that my book is as long as it is. And it's interesting to track and see over time, how opinion of certain players changed, and new players come on the scene and they have to replace other ones, like I said earlier with Jeter and Pujols and others. All right, so before we get to the Yankees depth chart and then the Mets after that, any questions so far just about how I went about it, my methodology, why I wrote the book, things like that? Okay, not hearing any. Let's dive in then. So like any typical baseball depth chart, there's 30 players that make the roster, but then there's way more than 30 names here. And that's because I list players at every position where they played significant games. So you'll see Mickey Mantle listed in center field, left field, and at first base. You'll see Yogi Berra there at catcher, and then again in left field. You'll see Ruth in both right field and left field. So that's the way depth charts work. It's not that I consider Mickey Mantle to be the third best first baseman in Yankee history. He's obviously on the team as an outfielder. I've got a little DH list there at the bottom right. That's just, if you wanted to have DiMaggio in center field, Mantle could be the DH to rest his knees. You could also have Mantle in left. We'll see that here in a minute when we look at the starting lineups I came up with. We're going to go through these position by position, and you can see all the players I considered. So if there's something here that's jumping out at you as like, wait, that guy, where's so-and-so? We'll get to that here in a minute when we go through position by position. But I wanted to start with just at a high level, this is what my roster looks like. I also wanted to compare it with, if you're familiar with the dream brackets that MLB did during the pandemic here to keep all of us entertained while we haven't had baseball. They did a really fun dream bracket where they worked with the team and the beat writers for each team and came up with similar dream teams like I've done here. And then they used out of the park baseball as a simulation to have these teams play against each other. That was pretty fascinating. And yes, the Yankees in the end did win. It was a March Madness style tournament. So anything could happen. There were definitely some weird results. If you paid attention to that tournament, the Brewers knocked off the Giants in round one. There's no way most of the time that an all-time Brewers team would beat an all-time Giants team, but they did that time. But the Yankees made it all the way, and they played the Reds in the World Series, and the Yankees won it. I think it went to 7 games, though, if I remember correctly. So anyway, as you see on the left, there's some differences from what they chose versus what I chose. They had Lazzeri starting over Cano at second. They, of course, had Mantle, DiMaggio, and Ruth as the starting outfield. Understandably, though, they wanted Reggie Jackson on the roster because of his postseason exploits. And then they had Roger Maris and Paul O'Neill, which I found a little curious. Maris obviously had those 2 peak seasons. Paul O'Neill was a great player, but I don't know that he's deserving of being on the all-time Yankees over Charlie Keller or Bernie Williams or a few others. But that's who they chose. They didn't include some guys I did. They had a little bit of a smaller roster, so they didn't include Munson. They didn't include Rizzuto, which I thought was interesting. They only had 1 shortstop in Jeter. And again, they didn't include Keller, Combs, or Williams in the outfield. And not surprisingly, they didn't include Randolph. That's admittedly a questionable choice of mine as one of the extra guys here. And then in terms of pitchers, they included Waite Hoyt. It's kind of hard to choose between Hoyt, Pennock, and Shockey from the early Yankees. I went with Shockey, leaving Hoyt and Pennock off. They went with Hoyt. They also didn't have room for Mussina. So at a high level, that's my depth chart. Any initial reactions or comments here? Otherwise, we'll just start looking at things position by position real quick. Got to be some things people disagree with.
Let me ask a question about the DH.
Yeah.
Since the DH was after any of those players, did you try to find some kind of quote unquote real
DHs? Yeah, I did that when someone was famous for being a DH, like Edgar Martinez or David Ortiz. I didn't do that for every team. And I included DH lineups for the National League teams just because when you've got such great hitters on a roster, it's kind of painful to expect. The example I like to give is am I really going to have Ralph Kiner sitting on the bench and have John Candelaria up at the plate? I mean, for the Pirates, you know, it's I like to have good hitters in my lineups, even for the National League team. So. Speaking of the lineups, this is what I put forward for the Yankees against righties and against lefties. I enjoy doing this because it allows you to have some fun platoons and stuff. The Yankees are so loaded with such clear-cut starters at most positions that there's a bit fewer platoons here than for some of the other teams. But I did essentially platoon Keller and Munson. You could have someone else as the DH against lefties, but I went with Munson. Keller's playing left field against righties, and that allows Mantle to rest some as a DH against righties and play left field. Obviously, you could have Mantle in center, but I felt DiMaggio could handle center just fine. I listed both Berra and Dickey because they were both outstanding. If you prefer one or the other, you could just list one, of course. And then Cano and Lazzeri seemed like a natural platoon. One's a lefty hitter, one's a righty. So that ends out the lineups there. Obviously, this is one of the strongest lineups amongst any of the dream teams in my book. I think the only ones that might rival this would be, say, the Red Sox or the Giants. This is talk about murderer's row. This is about as strong as it could possibly get. So in terms of, how I present each position in the book, there are plenty of stat tables, but then for each one, there's, paragraphs about each player. So the way these look in the book, WAR is total wins above replacement for that player, for that team. So in this case, that's just Giambi's 7 seasons for the Yankees, not his whole career. Same thing with Teixeira and Martinez and the others that played on different clubs. W3, that column is the top 3 WAR seasons. So immediately you see just how strong Gehrig was. Almost 32 WAR for his top 3 seasons versus only 20 for Mattingly's top 3. And then it goes down from there. The W divided by G column, that's WAR by games played. Again, you see just how strong Gehrig is. He's literally twice as much WAR value per game than anyone else on this list. That 519 number is over twice Giambi's 245. And then the traditional stats, average, home runs, stolen bases for the Yankees, and then OPS plus, which I assume everyone on the call is pretty familiar with as well. So the only 2 new things here is my W3 column, again, top 3 WAR seasons, and the WG column, WAR divided by games played. Now, one caveat I should mention, not that anyone will be checking any of these numbers here on the call, after I published the book, like 6 months later, Baseball Reference changed their WAR equation. These WAR equations change over time. Certainly the Baseball Reference one does as people try and fine tune it. So none of these WAR numbers are probably accurate. They're all going to be off by just a little, which is frustrating for all of us authors out there that have books in print, but it is what it is. And I'll be painstakingly going through and touching up all the WAR numbers and fixing them when I update the book next year. But they're close, obviously Gehrig is number 1 here. Mattingly is number 2. It's possible that, say, if you compare Giambi and Skowron, if you looked up right now on Baseball Reference, maybe Giambi's WAR is a little higher than Skowron's instead of it being flipped. But they're going to be pretty, directionally correct and pretty similar. So this table isn't all that interesting in the sense that Gehrig is obviously the top choice. Mattingly is obviously the backup. You could make a case for some of these other guys to crack the roster as like a 3rd first baseman, but I didn't end up choosing any of them. If we look at second base, it's a lot more close and complicated. I was pretty surprised to see Willie Randolph have the most WAR, even more than Lazzeri. Granted, he played the most seasons here, but only 1 more than Lazzeri. And yet he had higher WAR. He had higher WAR per game played. I was pretty surprised to see that. Now, Cano, with only 9 seasons, is much stronger as a peak performer. You see his W3 there, much higher, 24.3, much higher than Randolph or Lazzeri or anyone else on the list, really. But there's other good candidates here. I mean, I definitely looked at McDougal. I looked at Gordon. I didn't look too strongly at the 4 at the bottom. And I know Richardson is a big fan favorite of people that are a little bit older than me and grew up loving the Yankees of the 60s. but his offensive numbers weren't real strong. So here I went with Lazare. I went with Cano, Lazare, Randolph in that order as the three I chose for the roster. You could flip that order around, and you could, make a case against the WAR numbers here that maybe Randolph isn't deserving of making an all-time Yankees roster. But I went with them. You could make a case for Gordon based on peak performance, only 7 seasons, but very strong peak performance, obviously. So Jeff, I see your note in the chat. I probably answered that before about Mandel as DH. I listed him as DH just because he was one of the better hitters and needs a spot on the depth chart. But I didn't go strictly by people that played after 1973 for DHs. Third base was also interesting. This is definitely a case where when I first started writing the book, my 2 selections at third would have been Nettles and Rolfe. A-Rod hadn't joined the Yankees yet. In fact, A-Rod had only been playing for a few years for the Mariners at that point. But by the time it was all said and done, he'd had some pretty explosive seasons for the Rangers, for the Yankees. And I've essentially just given away that he is the hitter that makes 3 all-time dream teams in my book, right? By saying what I just said. He makes the Rangers team, he makes the Yankees team, and of course he makes the Mariners team. Now, some people might not love the fact that he's making all of these given the controversies around him, but if you just base it on numbers, he's definitely deserving. I do mention in the book where players are, either suspected or known of using steroids or any sort of violation like that. But I didn't try to discount their stats because none of us know exactly what these guys would have done statistically. We could, discount them to some degree, and that'd be a subjective thing to try and do. I didn't attempt to do that, nor did I exclude Pete Rose or Shoeless Joe or any of the people that aren't allowed in the Hall of Fame. They're all included in the book, and I leave it to the reader if they want to kick someone off of a particular roster. I'll keep going along here. You feel free to use the chat or come off mute anytime if you want to make comments, but we'll just keep plugging along here. Derek Jeter, again, wouldn't have even been someone I was looking at in 1999 when I started the book. I probably back then would have gone with Rizzuto and maybe Crosetti just based on longevity, even though his numbers weren't all that impressive. But obviously Jeter is the starter here, and Rizzuto is a very capable backup. Definitely would have been the weak spot in the lineup prior to Jeter in terms of an all-time Yankees roster. But good thing for that Jeter came along. Catcher is one of the positions that when I get asked in radio interviews, are there any teams that are really, really strong at a particular position? I always say Yankees at catcher, right? Berra, Dickey, Munson, Posada, Howard, at least hitting wise, you could say Sanchez now too. But, just those top guys, the idea that you'd have an all-time Yankees roster and not include Posada, that, when I had to make that decision, I was like, really? Wow. Okay. Well, but who are you going to kick off? You're going to kick off Berra or Dickey? No. If you're going to give a third catcher, well, it comes down to Munson and Posada in my mind. So that's a tough choice. I went with Munson. You could make a case for Posada, but that's who I went with there. Interesting that Berra and Dickey's numbers are so similar. Here, if you look at the WAR numbers, they played almost the same number of seasons. Total WAR is similar. Peak WAR is similar. WAR by games played is similar. Even their OPS is almost identical. OPS plus 125 versus 127. They almost stole the same number of bases, meager though it is, 30 and 36. Obviously, there's some differences in terms of things like batting average and home runs, but a lot of similarities between those two in terms of at least their offensive numbers. Let me pause here and let's see if anyone wants to come off mute and try and guess. You've been seeing these silhouettes at the bottom of the screen. Who are those 8 guys from left to right? Anyone want to try and guess them in order? They're all Yankees. That's why they're here.
I'll guess.
Go for it, Bob.
Another one. Mickey number 3, Babe Ruth 4, Garrett 5, Jeter number 7, 6 is DiMaggio, and so I'm down to number 2, and I'm not sure.
Did you say number 8, the pitcher on the far right?
Oh no, I didn't see that. That looks like Koufax. Eddie Lopez.
No, that's Whitey Ford. So yeah. So anyone want to guess number 2 and number 3? I think you may have gotten one of those wrong. Two is Mantle and 3 is Berra. So in my book, I create one silhouette to represent that team as sort of their franchise player, and it's on the first page of each chapter. And at the very end of the chapter, I divulge who the franchise player is. For the Yankees, it's Babe Ruth. For some of the teams, it was a real easy thing to choose an all-time franchise player. If you think about like the Royals with George Brett or the Padres with Tony Gwynn, there's some teams where it's just clear who their all-time best is. For other teams, it's a lot less clear. The example I like to give is the Dodgers. I went with Jackie Robinson, not for political reasons, but just based on the merits and based on his numbers. But you could make a case for Snyder, Koufax, Kershaw, Reese, a half dozen different Dodgers. But I went with Jackie. There are a few other teams where it's sort of a close call, like the Reds. I went with Johnny Bench. You can make a case for Morgan or Rose or various others. For the Yankees, I thought it's pretty easy to say Babe Ruth, but I suppose you can make a case for a few others. I've since made a lot more silhouettes than the ones that are in the book. I'm going to actually put these on like coffee mugs and things like that at some of these print-on-demand sites and sell some products down the road. All right, so the Yankees outfield, obviously a lot of candidates to consider here. I cheated a little bit by having Mantle in left field in my lineups, even though he was more of a pure center fielder, primary center fielder. But it's hard to not have both Mantle and DiMaggio in your lineups. I didn't include Roy White on my roster, even though he had the most WAR of any pure left fielder for the Yankees. I just felt like on a peak performance basis, he wasn't as strong as Keller, and wasn't quite deserving of making it. In terms of center field, I did load it up with Mantle, DiMaggio, Williams, and I included Combs as well. Obviously, Henderson is great value on a per game basis, but he only played 5 seasons for the Yankees, so hard to include him. I included Babe Ruth, obviously, from right field. I've heard people argue with me that I should have included Winfield or even Reggie Jackson because of his postseason value. If you weigh postseason a lot, and heroics and exploits a lot, then yeah, Reggie Jackson would clearly make it. I tried to weigh that against, longevity and peak performance and overall value, and so he didn't quite make it for me. As we saw earlier, MLB included both Maris and O'Neill. I think based on Maris's 2 huge seasons, I can understand that to some extent. I don't understand including Paul O'Neill given all these other great candidates here. Brett Gardner's still playing. I don't see him cracking the all-time Yankees roster. He's been a good player, sometimes a great player, but not good enough to make an all-time team like the Yankees. In terms of pitching, lots of great pitchers in the Yankees history, although I will say not as strong of a starting pitching selection as some other teams. The Dodgers are stronger. The Red Sox are stronger. I'd say the Giants are stronger. Even the Phillies maybe are stronger. But, I went with, not in this order, but I went with Ruffing, Ford, Pettit, Guidry, Shockey, Stottlemyre, Gomez, and Mussina. That left off some really good pitchers like Hoyt and Pennock. It's hard to choose. You look at these numbers between Shockey, Hoyt, and Pennock, right? They were teammates. It's hard to choose between Mussina and Sabathia. They had overlapping time and at least both modern Yankees pitchers. The numbers are pretty similar. Sabathia's numbers would need to be adjusted a little. This is from the book, and so it doesn't include last season. But you know, it's hard to leave off some of these guys when it's such close calls.
Where's Vic Raschi?
He's probably, I went with anyone here with a total WAR for the Yankees of 20 or more. And so my guess is, at least when I wrote the book, the equation they used then, his was coming up just short of that. Yeah, surprising to see Clemens with an ERA over 4. Yep, his seasons with the Yankees were pretty late in his career and weren't his most dominating, at least some of them. Good guess, by the way, on John Olerud from M. Frank there in the chat. He did not make all 3 of those. I think I only had him on 2 of them. I think I have him on the Mets and the Mariners. I can't remember, but he didn't make all 3. But he was considered for all 3. I think he didn't make the Blue Jays because the Blue Jays had a lot of loaded options at first base. Delgado, Encarnacion, McGriff. There was quite a lot there, given that they're a pretty young team. And a definite strength of the Yankees is relief pitching. I mean, catcher is what I mentioned earlier, is really strong. Obviously, the starting 3 in the outfield. But with Mariano Rivera at the top of the list, greatest closer of all time, most people would say. But then Righetti, Gossage, Lyle, all having some really good seasons for the Yankees. And then old-timer Johnny Murphy, one of their early sort of dedicated relievers. I talked about him a little. I could have talked about a lot of other Yankee relievers. I think when I update the book, I'll need to at least talk about Chapman. But probably I'll expand this a little bit and talk about more than just these 5. I didn't include Murphy. It would have been interesting to include him in there as sort of a pioneer, but I included those first 4 that you see. Another feature of the book, and we'll switch over to the Mets here pretty soon, is at the end of each chapter, I look at the all-time best single seasons. And for the Yankees, for the hitters, it's a very long table. My cutoff for these in each chapter was a WAR of 8 or higher. For some teams, there's only like a handful of seasons, especially some of the expansionary teams. For the Yankees, obviously, there's a lot. You see there on the left, it's just dominated by Ruth and Gehrig and Mantle. You have to go all the way down to, I don't know what that is, the 13th or 14th season before you get someone other than those 3. Rickey Henderson, 1985, had a great year. And then you keep going down, you see A-Rod a couple of times, and then the table continues on the right. You see more Gehrig. You finally get a DiMaggio season, his big 1941 streak year. Snuffy is there, 1945, a war season. Pretty interesting that he appears not only in 45, but 44 as well. Joe Gordon, 1942 season. You see Aaron Judge's rookie campaign of 2017, got barely above 8 as a WAR. Cano makes the list a couple of times. And then Greg Nettles during the sort of anemic home run years, 1976 with his 32 bombs, ends up making the list. And then finally, Derek Jeter had 1 season with an 8 or higher WAR, exactly 8 to round out this list. Now, as you might expect, the pitching list for the Yankees is a lot shorter. I mean, some teams had, the opposite. They had only 5 or 6 guys with high batting and defense WAR, and maybe 15 or 20 pitchers with over 8 WAR. The Yankees, it's obviously loaded with hitters, and there's only these 7 seasons where someone had over 8 WAR as a pitcher. Nice mix of names here, including some guys that obviously didn't make my all-time dream team, like Chesbro and Orth and Catfish. Oh, and Russ Ford at the top of the list. And not the Whitey Ford, Russ Ford. Not surprising to see Ron Guidry's outstanding season. I remember being 5 years old and looking at his baseball card and just going, what kind of a season was that? Like, I was just starting to understand stats like earned run average and stuff, and I was blown away by Guidry's numbers that year. All right, so that's the Yankees. Let's switch over to the Mets. Obviously not nearly as strong of a roster or lineup or anything, given that they've only been around since the 60s compared to the Yankees. Not really a fair comparison. But you see here the overall roster that I went with. The one that I've gotten the most probably pushback from Mets fans is at catcher, going with Piazza, Carter, and Stearns, and not Jerry Grody. They loved his handling of Seaver and Kuzman and Matlack and all the pitchers. And even though he wasn't much of a hitter, they feel like Stearns, even though he was kind of a unique offensive person for a catcher, they feel like he didn't really measure up. And we'll get to that table here in a second. Most Mets fans, though, don't have too much disagreement with the rest of what you see here. Crowded outfield again with various names and some players that I looked at but didn't include. We'll get to that in a second. Very strong pitching for the Mets. I mean, given that they're an expansion era club, this is really strong pitching. I got DeGrom on there after his great 2018 season. Obviously, he had a great season last year, but my book had already been published by then. In terms of some differences from what MLB just did for their bracket challenge, the Mets didn't go very far in the tournament, by the way. I think they lost in the first round, although it's understandable. They were, I think, up against the Cubs, and the Cubs have a very long history, so have a lot more talent to draw from. They had pretty much the same outfield starters as mine, but then they had Cespedes included instead of who did I have? I guess McReynolds and Dykstra. They went with Cespedes in addition to Mookie and Tommy Agee. They included Alonso after just one season. I didn't have that opportunity to even consider Alonso since my book came out before last year. But I don't know. I don't think I would, as fun as his season was last year, I don't know that I would include Alonso over Olerud based on just 1 year, but that's debatable, I suppose. Starting pitching, they included Santana. Had some good years, although his best years were for the Twins, of course. They went with Santana instead of Matlack, Cone, or Darling. And then they went with the same three relief pitchers I did, Franco, McGraw, and Orozco. But they also added Seth Lugo, which I thought was an interesting addition. So in terms of the lineups that I went with, you've got some speed at the top with Reyes, some all-around ability there with Beltran. And then I mix it up a little, different orders based on righties and lefties. I didn't want to see Piazza behind the plate every day, so I got Gary Carter behind the plate against lefties and let Piazza play the DH role against left-handers. I got Hojo in there as a DH against righties. And let's see, what other differences do I see here? David Wright's in the lineup in a couple of different spots in the order. Keith Hernandez probably should play every day for his defense, although Olerud was pretty good too. Alfonso was the pretty clear starter at second base, so I just had him listed every day. And then I had one platoon there, Mookie Wilson and Cleon Jones in left field. Wilson is a switch hitter, but I wanted to give some time to both of them in these lineups. You know, these lineups aren't a science. It's more of a fun thing to do as part of the project. Yeah, definitely Jeff could include Billy Wagner. I mean, he was great for multiple teams. I mean, he had some incredible strikeout numbers, and I definitely considered him for multiple dream teams here. So some of the position tables for the Mets, real quick. Hernandez pretty clearly the starter. I went with Olerud as the backup. Obviously, at this point, if you get multiple good seasons out of Alonso, then you can make a case pretty quickly that he'll be deserving over Olerud. But so far, he's only had the one big year. Interesting here was Ed Kranepool. You can make a case for him with his 18 seasons versus Olerud's 3. If you look at him, he was, according to WAR, he was barely above replacement value. I mean, over 18 seasons, his total combined career WAR was 4.4. That number didn't particularly surprise me, knowing his career as I did, but he certainly played a long time for the Mets. Any big Kranepool fans on the call tonight? Jay, I see Jay's hand go. I don't see Jay, but I see his hand going up. So, you know, this is one of those areas where if you prefer longevity, if you prefer, you know, steady, some would say mediocre, but steady value over shorter peak performance, then you would choose Kranepool over Olerud. Maybe even, heck, choose him over Hernandez if you really wanted to be crazy. Second base, I went with Alfonso. He seemed like the clear starter here at second, and then it was a close call for the backup. I went with Murphy, but I know a lot of fans like Wally Backman, always had dirt on his uniform. Jeff Kent, Ron Hunt, and Greg Jeffries. So other players to consider here at second, I went with Murphy, but certainly if someone wanted to argue for, say, Backman, I wouldn't argue too strenuously. Over at third base, when I first started writing the book, you know, David Wright wouldn't have been a candidate, so I would have probably gone with Hojo as the starter and then maybe Wayne Garrett as the backup. But then by now, David Wright is the clear starter, and I can still include Howard Johnson in his 30-30 seasons as the backup. Let's pause here and take a look at my fewer Mets silhouettes. Anyone want to come off mute and try and guess all 5 of those? I see Jay talking, but come off mute, sir. Try again. There you go.
Seaver, Hernandez, definitely Strawberry and Doc. The middle
Yeah.
one, that's a little tougher.
David Wright. David
Wright.
Wright.
Yeah.
Yeah, David Wright. Yeah, he's diving for a ball probably right along the foul line. So yeah, good. For me, the franchise player was the guy literally nicknamed the franchise, Seaver. That was pretty obvious. Not quite as obvious as, say, Brett for the Royals or Gwen for the Padres, but seemed pretty obvious to me to go with Seaver. Shortstop, not a lot of candidates here. You've got 2 players that have played for the Mets a long time, Jose Reyes and Bud Harrelson. Seemed pretty clear that they should be the starter and the backup. Ray Ordonez, of course, with his great defense. But when you look at his offense, pretty anemic. To see an OPS plus of 58, for those here that are familiar with what OPS plus is, that is not an attractive number. For catcher, again, this is where I've gotten probably the most feedback on my Mets. I went with Piazza, Carter, and Stearns, but you could certainly make a case for Grody based on just tenure, length of time with the team, his handling of the pitchers, his overall defense, lots of things in favor of him. Offense not being one of them, 85, well below at league average for OPS plus. But I liked Stearns, and you know, it's rare to see a catcher steal bases, and Stearns was someone that could swipe some bags, so maybe that clouded my judgment a little. Any thoughts on catcher here? Anyone here that definitely would have gone with Jerry over Stearns? Few heads nodding, but okay. Moving on to the outfield, a lot of candidates, not obviously as many as the Yankees had to choose from, but I went with Jones and McReynolds from left field. I went with several center fielders, Beltran, Wilson, Dykstra, and Agee, and then Strawberry as the lone primary right fielder. A few other guys here that I took a good long look at, but and certainly Conforto, if he keeps playing well, could enter the conversation. Again, that doesn't include his year from last year. That's true for anyone that we're seeing here. It doesn't include 2019 season nor the fledgling 2020 season that we're all enjoying so far. If you look at starting pitching for the Mets, pretty clearly Tom Seaver's at the top of that list, although Dwight Gooden had 1 or 2 years that would have rivaled Seaver's best. He just didn't have the consistency that Seaver did over such a long period of time for the Mets. Kuzman was always sort of second fiddle to Seaver, but was a great compliment to him. Clearly needs to make the team. And then I felt like Fernandez, Matlack, DeGrom, by the time I got the book published, clearly was making it, and he's just adding to his case every day. Leiter, Cone, Darling. You could make a case for some of those 4 at the bottom there, particularly Santana, as I said. MLB included him instead of some of the guys I did. But he only pitched 4 seasons for the Mets. So him and Dickey, that wasn't quite enough in my mind to make it. Although based on peak performance, maybe you would include one or both of them. Interesting to me, looking at these numbers, it just occurred to me that as good as Doc's 2 or 3 best seasons were, his peak WAR, 23.2, is still pretty far behind Seaver's peak WAR. So that, again, just speaks to just how good Seaver was relative to his peers. that his WAR is 30.1 from his top 3 years. Pretty impressive. In terms of relievers, I just went with McGraw, Orozco, and Franco. You could make a case for McDowell. He and Orozco, of course, were teammates together. Wagner had got a good number of saves and plenty of strikeouts, very low WHIP, very low ERA, dominating pitcher, but only for 4 seasons. So again, peak performance, you might want to include Wagner. I actually had Benitez on there until DeGrom, finally won a Cy Young, and then I had to take somebody off. And I looked at Ron Darling, I looked at Benitez, and I decided to drop Benitez from the roster in order to get DeGrom on. All right, so that was the Mets. Unless there's any comments on the Mets, we just got a few minutes left. I'm happy to stay on past the hour, but this is sort of the last fun trivia thing that I wanted to run through. This is all 30 franchise players. We did this on the other 2 calls I did. Anyone want to guess? We've seen Seaver. He's in the top row, 3rd from the left. We've seen Babe Ruth for the Yankees. He's the bottom left corner. Anyone want to throw out names of some of the other players that you're seeing here? Again, the hint is there's only one guy representing each club. So Lou Gehrig, Mickey Mantle, Derek Jeter are nowhere to be found here because Ruth represents the Yankees, right? So there's no other Yankees.
I'm seeing Randy Johnson.
Yep, top row towards the right.
Is that Bob Feller down there?
Bob Feller, yeah, 2nd from the left, representing the Indians.
Stan Musial.
Stan Musial, certainly.
Cal Ripken.
Cal Ripken is there, is a fielder there, 3rd from the left on the bottom row.
Bench squatting.
I'm sorry, say again?
Bench squatting on the bottom.
Yeah, bench squatting. Yeah, thank you. I thought that was a player's name, bench squatter. I'm like, who's that? Yeah, Johnny Bench for the Reds. Yep.
Hank Aaron.
Hank Aaron is there. Yep. Top
Ty
row,
Cobb.
2nd from the right. Yeah, you got Ty Cobb. Middle row, 3rd from the right.
Is that Ricky Henderson?
Ricky Henderson representing the A's. That was a close call because you could go with a lot of different guys from the A's, particularly because Henderson, only played about half his career there. But in the end, I chose Henderson. So, yeah, he's there running sort of in the middle of the top row.
And I see Willie Mays.
Yep, Willie Mays, 2nd row, far right.
Craig Biggio.
Craig Biggio, not a lot of people guess him because it could be Biggio or it could be Bagwell for the Astros. But, yeah, he's in the middle of the bottom row.
Well, you said George Brett, so he's there somewhere.
Yeah, he's sort of in the middle, a little bit to the right in the 2nd row, next to Cobb.
Is Nolan Ryan on there?
Nolan's not. He makes, as we saw earlier, he makes 3 different teams, but he wasn't good enough for any of them to be the franchise player.
The old timer leaning on the bat should be obvious, but I can't get it.
It's a tough one actually, and it's one where it was a close call. You could easily go with someone else to represent that team.
Pie trainer.
I'll give you the hint. He's for the Cubs, and it's not Ernie Banks. That's who you might think would be the Cubs franchise player, but I went with an old timer.
Ed Doherty?
I'm sorry?
Jackie Robinson.
Yeah, Jackie Robinson, 2nd from the right between Cobb and Mays in the 2nd row.
I got Ed Doherty for the old town.
No, the old timer for the Cubs is Cap Anson. Someone should be guessing the top right corner.
Ted Williams.
Yeah, Red Sox, Ted Williams. And then I'd say another fairly easy one is the bottom right corner.
Mike Schmidt.
Okay, so Mike Schmidt is there for the Phillies, 3rd from the left in the 2nd row. Yep. Any guesses on the bottom right corner hitter? Pittsburgh Pirates?
Ralph Kiner.
Kiner.
No. Think older. Yeah, I see Martin saying Honus Wagner. He's on mute, but I saw him mouth it. How about in the very middle, there's a pitcher. Any guesses on that?
Walter Johnson.
Yeah, for the Senators/Twins, Walter Johnson. How about in between Ricky Henderson and Randy Johnson in the top row?
Kirby Puckett.
No, Johnson has to make it for the Senators/Twins.
Okay.
Right era, though.
Tony Gwynn.
Tony Gwynn for the Padres, right. All right, we're getting down to the pretty difficult ones here for the most part. Any final guesses? Otherwise, I'll just go in order and reveal the ones we haven't said yet. All right, so top row, far left is a very difficult one. Todd Helton representing the Rockies. Then we've got Musial and Seaver we already mentioned. Next up is Mike Trout leaping up to catch a ball for the Angels. Then you've got Henderson, Gwynn, Randy Johnson we've already mentioned. The next one's kind of tough, but I went with Pudge Rodriguez to represent the Rangers. That's him batting there next to Hank Aaron and Ted Williams. Then the next row starting at the left, the Thunder Thighs there is Big Frank Thomas for the White Sox. Could have gone with Appling or, Aparicio or Fox. Lots of players for the White Sox, but I went with Frank Thomas. The next one is one of the very hardest, one of the new expansion era teams. Evan Longoria is clearly the best player for the Rays in their history so far, but it's not easy to guess that from that silhouette. Then you've got Mike Schmidt. Then a close call. You could choose a lot of players from the Expos Nationals, but I went with Gary Carter as a catcher. Walter Johnson. And then one that a lot of people guess based on his swing, that's Ken Griffey Jr. representing the Mariners. Then you got George Brett, Ty Cobb, Jackie Robinson, and Willie Mays, which you guys already guessed. And then the final row, we've already nailed Babe Ruth, Bob Feller, Cal Ripken, Johnny Bench. I mentioned Cap Anson. One person guessed Craig Biggio correctly. Now is the most difficult one of the entire list. Someone mentioned Nolan Ryan, probably looking at this image because it looks like Nolan Ryan, but that is Dave Stieb of the Blue Jays. You can make a case for Bautista or Bell or various other Blue Jays, but I went with Stieb, but it certainly does look like Nolan. And then the next one up is a little bit hard to remember, but that's Giancarlo Stanton representing the Marlins. He's not on the Marlins anymore, so it doesn't usually come to mind. And then Robin Yount representing the Brewers and Honus Wagner for the Pirates. So those were the 30 that I chose. It's always I printed this off and had it as an activity at the last SABR convention, and people were walking around the convention trying to guess all these players. So that was kind of a lot of fun. Just to wrap things up here, like I said, I'm going to be updating the book based on the latest numbers and everything after next season. So there'll be a second edition then. And I'm also going to include in that some results from a big simulation I'm going to be doing. I mentioned that baseball, MLB, partnered with Out of the Park to do their tournament. The Yankees beat the Reds in the end at the end of that tournament. I'm going to do something a little different with Out of the Park. I'm going to run 100 full seasons. Might seem like a lot of work, but they have an engine that allows you to just crank through it automatically and then see the results. Takes a lot of prep though. I got to make sure that all the players' ratings are just right the way I want them. So I'm working with them directly on this, and we're gonna do it together a little bit later this year. I would have already had it sort of in the works by now, but then MLB came knocking and they had to partner with them on their stuff first, which I understand. But but they'll get around to partnering with me on this, and we'll get some really interesting results. And by doing 100 full seasons, that'll sort of even out any oddities that any 7-game series might present. It'll be interesting. I'm sure the Yankees will do very well. I don't know that they'll necessarily do the best because, as I said, their starting pitching isn't as strong as, say, the Dodgers or Giants or Red Sox or a few others. Their lineup is obviously formidable, but we'll see, and it'll be interesting to see how the Mets do. Obviously, they won't do as well as most of the long-standing original teams as an expansion era team. But they'll do quite well compared to other expansion era teams, at least, given their strong pitching for sure. As I said, I'm going to be using these silhouettes I've created to create various things. I actually have a mask just like that. The one I created for myself using Zazzle has Babe Ruth, Walter Johnson, Christy Mathewson, Honus Wagner, and Ty Cobb. I wanted to have a first-class mask. If we're all going to be living in this pandemic, I wanted to have a first-class mask. And of course, those were the first 5 as the first class in the Hall of Fame. And it's a high-quality mask. I thought it would be something that I put it in the laundry a couple times and it falls apart. But that's been my baseball mask as I've been going to the grocery store and stuff. But I'll be creating them for each team. I'll be creating coffee mugs, T-shirts, and all this. I've created all these silhouettes myself, so it's my little way of I'm not an artistic person, but I can create silhouettes in Photoshop well enough. So thanks. Been good to be with all of you. I'm doing a few more of these. I think I've got the Astros coming up. I've got the Tigers coming up. Those chapters for Houston and Detroit. So good to be with all of you. Shoot me an email if you want to discuss anything about the book or about the players we talked about tonight. I've got a website for the book now, Taking the Field. Not a very active site, just a place to go to get information about the book and what I'm up to. So thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Tom.
Thanks, Tom.
Thank you. Thank you.
Good
My
job.
pleasure. Thanks. My pleasure. Hope to meet some of you in person, those that I haven't yet, at future SABR events, SABR conventions. I don't get down to New York City too often because it's 6 hours away, 1 hour by plane. But if we can have the 50th SABR happen in Baltimore next year, I'll definitely be there. So hope to meet some of you all in person.
I see this is being recorded, so I'll try and find out a way to either get a link on our website or maybe embed it somehow.
Yep.
I don't know how that works.
Okay. All right, guys.
Okay,
Thanks a
take care,
lot.
everyone.
Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.